The story of Upbuild began in a monastery. On our quest to understand ourselves more deeply, we recognize that it is our attachment to our egos, our identities, that gets in the way of being our true selves. This podcast will help you understand your ego. It will help you better understand your inner world, the motivations, insecurities, and emotions that affect your every action and relationship. Welcome to Upbuilding the Self. Hi everyone, this is Vipin and I'm here with Michael and Hari Prasada. Hey guys, good morning and good evening.
And good afternoon to you.
I was going to say, we've got morning, afternoon, and evening covered among the three of us. How are you both?
Oh, I'm good.
Very good. Very good.
Yes, I'm coming back from retreats with my guru, Satchidananda Swami, feeling very, very blessed, very grateful, enlivened, and eager to share what has been there in my consciousness. And I think we have a great opportunity here as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, the three of us were together in the same place for the first time in many months last week and the week before, and that felt very special. So I'm looking forward to being able to do that again. But it's a close second to be together with you both in this podcast space.
Same.
Yeah, and today we are going to address a topic that is familiar to everyone. I would venture to say every single person is familiar with this topic. And Michael, I'd love to ask you to share with us. You really had the inspiration behind bringing this topic to our podcast. So maybe you can share a little bit about the catalyst for it and before we get into it.
Yeah. So first of all, to introduce the topic, we're talking about gossip. And hopefully we'll bring to light some of the subtle nuances that are present in why we gossip and what happens when we gossip, the cost of gossip. And where the inspiration came from was a coaching session that I had many months ago with a client who was talking about his own gossip. And it was a beautiful conversation where he was taking responsibility and talking about the costs that came from what he had been doing. But even though I didn't share this with him, in my mind, what he had done was pretty innocuous. It wasn't so egregious, but it did get me thinking of all the subtle ways that I gossip. And I had grown up on Long Island. And for anyone who knows Long Island, there's a lot of gossip in the different communities.
You and Hari Prasada.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
And I had this aversion to gossip because I saw so much of it. And in my mind, particularly, it was this aversion to seeing how, especially the moms would get together and talk about either the kids or the other people in the community. And that never really sat right with me. But I very much othered it in terms of thinking that, okay, this was a problem that somebody else had or this community had, but was never really a problem for me. And in this coaching session, I got a strong insight of this is something that I deal with, that I am guilty of, that many people are guilty of, but we're not paying attention to it. And there's a real cost to it. And if we're not clear about what's really going on, then we're going to pay that cost without seeing it.
Wow. Thank you. That really set a beautiful foundation for our conversation. Thank you for sharing that and so openly about what you saw in yourself. And let's see if we can just unpack more of what you're saying about what is the insidious nature of gossip and what is its impact on us. So let's start with defining what we're talking about. How do you both define gossip? What is gossip?
Gossip is really enjoying the faults or the misfortune of another. It's enjoying the faults or the misfortune of another. It comes down to taking pleasure in another person's
Suffering.
pain. Yeah, so there's a sadistic element that's very, very, very subtle. It's hidden that makes gossip what it is. And the more we become aware of that, the more alarming it is. And the more it's like, no, well, I never gossip. But wait a minute, is that really true?
And a key part is not just taking pleasure in it, because that can be done on an individual basis, but it's also sharing then that information.
Which increases the pleasure.
Right.
It increases the pleasure, and it creates now connection that enhances it. It becomes tastier.
Okay. And just one point of clarification, Hari Prasad, you mentioned taking pleasure in someone else's faults or misfortune. So when we are, quote, gossiping about someone's achievements and not in a, wow, can you believe that person won that thing, but more of like a celebration, but we're still talking about it. Is that not considered gossip under what we're talking about here today?
If you're talking about an amazement, a genuine awe around what someone else has done, that would not be gossip. Gossip has an edge to it. Gossip has a particular energy where it's like, did you hear that? Oh my God. Did you hear that? There's a way in which inherent in gossip is leveling. We've spoken about this in a previous podcast. Kierkegaard gives the understanding that we all are trying to level one another, to prop ourselves up. And if other people are doing something, we want to bring them down to our level and beneath. And that comes from envy, that my ego says I should be special, I should be better. And if somebody else is doing something good, then I should bring them down or diminish it, dismiss it. I have very subtle ways of doing that so that I don't feel like I'm a bad person. No, I'm a good person. But that's what we're doing at the heart of it. We just don't recognize it. And if somebody does something really bad, ooh, wow, amazing. See, I'm not so bad. Look at how bad this person is.
Okay, very helpful. So we have a clear definition of what we're talking about. We're talking about gossip as the enjoyment of talking about another person's faults or misfortune. So Michael shared a bit about his inspiration for bringing this topic into the podcast, but I'd love to hear from both of you. Why is it so important that we talk about this on the podcast?
We all hold for ourselves, whether we've done the work consciously or not, and certainly better if we've done it consciously, a set of values that are important to us. And those values, while they might differ in the details, they'll include things like respect and appreciation for other people, treating other people as if we'd want to be treated ourselves. Those are sort of table stakes kinds of values that I would say all of us hold. And when we are gossiping, we are violating those values. And it's a big deal when we start violating our own values, because then we become the type of person that is okay violating our values. And that can be a very slippery slope.
I really appreciate that.
Gossip brings down our consciousness. If we're trying to become our best self, then we have to invest in raising our consciousness. That's the whole name of the game. And gossip does exactly the opposite. It brings our consciousness down. It invests in the ego instead of the self. So now I'm in this mood of leveling and enjoying misfortune and pain. And how can I then reach my goal of being the real self, being who I actually am at the core? It's impossible. It's like, trying to fan a fire while pouring water on it. Doesn't work.
It reminds me of this quote from Emerson that we share in our class on the Bhagavad Gita, that Emerson says, you sow a thought and you reap an action. You sow an action and you reap a habit. You sow a habit and you reap a character. You sow a character and you reap a destiny. And it starts with the thoughts that we sow. As we sow those thoughts, there's direct connection to a destiny that we reap. And often we don't connect these pieces. So what you're saying is, in gossiping, we are sowing a lot of thoughts in our consciousness, and that affects our destination. And Hari Prasad, you say this all of the time, we have to be real consciousness connoisseurs. We have to be vigilant about what we allow into our consciousness and that we allow into the consciousness of those around us. If we're polluting our own consciousness and that of the consciousness around us, then where do we expect to go together as a group?
And there's something about gossip that is baked in that hides what's really going on for us, because we're talking about some content and we generally believe that's really what, like, it's important that I share this piece of information with this other person. And so our true intentions are usually masked from us. And of course, that is the definition of not being conscious. So that's a huge thing to keep in mind. The other thing is, I love that Emerson quote, and that speaks to why this is really important to us on an individual level. But if we think about also a collective level, or the cultures that we want to create, whether it's in an organization, whether it's in a family, or whether it's even just in a relationship between myself and my partner, when we do this and then repeat the behavior and then repeat the behavior, it becomes the culture. Culture is just a series of repeated behaviors. And so if we're not careful, we create a culture of gossip. And I think most of us would very easily agree that that's not the type of culture we'd want to create.
I feel so strongly about that, Michael. And I'm reminded of Jack Welch, who said, it's not a problem when people don't like what I do or certain decisions that the leadership makes. And when he was at GE, for example, that, you know, if you push back, fine, no problem. The problem is the water cooler conversations. That's the problem. That lets the poison out, because then you can't deal with things. It's just enjoying the disturbance and no dealing with anything. So gossip is a creation of a helplessness and a victim culture in certain cases, even where it's like, oh my God, you know, just complaining as opposed to actually dealing with things and getting pleasure in other people complaining with you. Now, to some degree, we need to process. And in certain situations, we may not be empowered to do anything about it. But the way we engage should not be taking pleasure in that. It shouldn't be getting juice from it. And that's really critical. To the extent that we're able to address things up front, we should. And to the extent that we're not, which is also a very realistic part of our lives, then we should be conscious of how we process, and that it is really to process the experience and to see, how can I get empathy? How can I work through this, navigate things in a healthy way, rather than just like, oh my God.
From one angle, I think gossip can seem pretty harmless. And it is such a common occurrence in organizations and outside. Maybe we can talk a bit about, to understand why or how to stop. It might help to start with, why do people gossip? In your minds, what are the reasons that this happens so easily and so comfortably?
I think it goes back to what we talked about with the ego. And when my ego is running me, which is the case for all of us, unless we work so hard to flip the switch, and that takes a lot of investment of time and energy. So we can understand that the default is that the ego is running us completely. And when that is the case, I can't tolerate other people making me insecure. And who makes me insecure? Practically everybody. Either there's somebody who makes me insecure because they're not showing up as well as I show up in the eyes of others. So it's like the insecurity is approving, look, see, I'm better than this person. That's actually still reacting to insecurity. Or they make me insecure because they're my competitor. They're sort of operating at a similar level. Or they make me insecure because they represent something which I'm striving for, or I wish I could strive for, and I can't get. So in different ways, everybody's making us insecure. And we're always just reacting to other people and feeling not enough. We're always trying to prove ourselves to be enough in the world. There's not a single person who feels just when I come out of the womb and for the rest of my life, I feel enough. I'm always trying to make myself feel enough. And the self-help world is trying to tell you, don't worry, you are enough. You are enough. You're good. You're great. You are enough. And then so many others in self-help will tell you, well, this is how you can become enough. If you just do these things and you become great, then you'll be enough. But all of that is just the ego in the same loop. So gossip comes from that insecurity of wanting to feel enough and not recognizing because it's humiliating. So I don't want to see that. I block that. Internally, I don't allow myself to feel the insecurity very consciously. Sometimes it peeks through my blocks, but I try to keep it in check. And I just I'm fine. I do things. I'm okay. I'm not reacting to everybody out of insecurity. But deep down, that's what's going on. And gossip helps me to cope in an unhealthy way with the insecurity of comparing myself to everybody else and not being able to tolerate that I don't ever feel enough.
Okay, this is very insightful. And as you were talking, I was both trying to listen to every word you were saying and then also running through a catalog in my own mind of examples and potential counterexamples to what you're saying. So what you're saying is that all gossip stems from some insecurity. If I didn't have an insecurity, I wouldn't engage in the gossip. What's powerful about that is then to think, when I catch myself engaging in something like that, I can look and see, what is the insecurity that's causing me to engage in this?
Yes.
Which is not something that I usually think about. But then, so a couple of examples I want to ask you about. If you take the Jack Welch example you shared, I mean, I remember an organization that I was working with more than a decade ago, and the organization was poorly managed and on the road to failure, which eventually it did. And I remember going to lunch with these two other buddies of mine. We were not in the management. We were a layer or two below. And we would have lunch every day. And as the company progressed to do poorly and we felt like helpless, those lunches became longer, in which we would certainly put it in the realm of gossip about everything that is going wrong and how there was no hope. And I think all three of us took great pleasure in just having that solidarity and the connection and having some, let's call it, sunlight in our cloudy days of work. Now, I could see there's sort of taking pleasure in the misfortune, it was our own misfortune in some ways, but also I'm looking at what would you say the insecurity there is? The insecurity that we're part of this failing enterprise and we're not able to do anything about it, or we're not actually doing anything about it. And so we might as well when we're making fun of it, it almost feels like we're poking fun at somebody else instead of poking fun at ourselves.
Was there any also gravity in the conversations? Was there any honesty and taking responsibility for that feeling of vulnerability that may have been there as a result of being a part of a failing organization?
It's a long time ago now, but I can say that probably not so much. I mean, if anything, it would be of the sort, man, we really got to get out of here. Like, what are we still doing here after so many months and months and months? But I do think the thing that was struck as I was processing this verbally out loud moments ago, this idea that we would be, Michael used the word othering. And I think we were doing something similar where it was easy to point fingers that everybody else, or not even everybody, but just at others who were not navigating the ship, who had that authority and sort of not taking much responsibility ourselves. And I think that, there is the insecurity that I'm on a sinking ship. And I think being able to talk about it and make fun of it kind of propped us up a bit, made us feel a little bit better about ourselves.
And this is the tricky thing about gossip, is that there's a lot of nuance there, because there are things like social bonding, which you're getting from that conversation, which is important. We can't discount the importance of that.
Yeah, they became two of my closest friends.
And you were getting some counsel and some empathy by engaging in those conversations. And the other thing is that it may have been a way of talking about behaviors that were not okay, of talking about things that the leadership was doing that you would want to do differently, whether it was while you maintain that job or if the three of you were to move on to something else, how you would do it differently. And so there's a correcting mechanism for negative behaviors when people talk about those things. But the thing that we want to illuminate here is like, what am I really up to? What is my real intention when I'm engaging in these behaviors? And if it is about social bonding, and if it is about correcting those behaviors, can I actually be more honest about doing those things and do it in a healthier way that doesn't also involve bringing other people down?
It's great. And what Jack Welch is talking about is also creating a culture where pushback is welcome and where we are responsible for the culture and the direction that we're creating.
Another example I wanted to share, Hari, when you shared about insecurities, and then Vipin, you prompted for that. And this is something I've shared with you guys in the past. I have a group of friends from a particular stage in life, and one of these friends has become insanely successful. I think that's a not an unreasonable way of putting it. And the things that he's been able to afford as a result of his success is astounding. So there's a group of us, he's not included in this, have a chat together. And there's often a lot of banter about his life decisions, about this person's life decisions. And it's quite negative about him and these decisions. And if I'm actually looking at the decisions, I don't condone all of them. I think there are some things that are actually quite unhealthy. But if I'm looking at the spirit of what's happening in that chat, it's quite a low consciousness situation. There's a lot of gossip, and where it's coming from is insecurity and envy. We're all wishing in some form or another that we could have that same sort of success that we see in this other person, and feeling like, well, why didn't this happen to me? I was just as smart, or I was smarter, or I worked harder. I maybe didn't have the connections that this person had. There's just a lot of things that are clearly present that have, and now the culture is one of negative talk rather than positive talk. And it's confronting because I'm part of it, but I'm also not wanting to engage in it. And I'm actually having trouble thinking about what is my participation in this group as a result of that.
Maybe this podcast will give you some clarity on that by the end here. But what you're saying is, I'm hearing two things there. One is there can be, why do people gossip? There's envy. And one way, when you talk about, well, can you believe that person's life choices? It's like bringing that other person down to make yourself feel better about your own life choices or your own prospects. And then it can be justifying your own path. And so like, oh, I would never do something like that.
I didn't need a house that was worth that many millions of dollars. Why would anyone need that kind of house?
Right. So it's, again, back to Hari's point about enoughness, making me feel like I'm trying to convince myself that I'm enough right here, right where I'm at, even though there is this, I'm looking with some desire and envy at the other person's assets.
Yeah, but I might not be clear about that. And that's the thing here, is like, I genuinely have tricked myself into believing that I don't agree with this person's life choices and they're wrong, and my life choices are correct.
Yeah. It's a way to feel superior.
So good. Yeah. So spot on.
So we've talked about connecting over gossip or bonding over gossip. We've talked about putting envy and insecurity, putting others down to level the playing field, justifying my own life's choices.
One more thing that I would mention is is entertainment. And this goes along with connection and bonding, but there's a slightly different energy to it.
It also goes along with insecurity because it's an entertainment from, that satisfies my insecurity.
Yeah, it's like I don't have anything else to say, and I want to get some feeling of excitement. I do this with my wife a lot. It's like I just like go through what I've read that day or what articles or what happened, and then say it to her. But I'm not like, where is it coming from? What am I actually wanting in that interaction? And there's often not a lot of intentionality around it.
This is why E exists, the entertainment channel. E, I mean, it's all to satisfy our desire for entertainment from a place of insecurity and to enjoy the, oh my God, did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? And I mean, there's also inherent in this, like, wow, this person got together with that other person. This person cheated on this other person. And we just soak all of that up to live in a world of entertainment. It's also playing out our fantasies. It's playing out our fantasies from that place of insecurity. Well, I'll never have that. So at least I can live vicariously through other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it also, I was thinking when Michael, you were speaking about this, and Hari, what you just added is there's an element of social proof also. Like I got this information from a source, or early on, I can share it, and I have some social capital by informing people about something that they might not have known before.
Yeah.
That's a great point. They say knowledge is power. And I think in the absence of like nourishing knowledge or uplifting knowledge, there's low consciousness knowledge as well, but it can still feel like some sort of power or indication of my importance.
Thank you. So I'm thinking, if I'm listening to this podcast, what if I'm thinking, man, these guys are really taking all the fun out of my life. I mean,
I've heard that about our podcast before. Actually, that wouldn't be the first time that somebody has said that.
That's amazing.
Aside from your dad, are we talking aside from your dad? So seriously though, if I'm thinking like, gosh, I'm watching E, I'm just like relaxing on my sofa after work, and these guys are really trying to even take that away from me. It's pretty harmless. Like, so I want to talk about, how does this really get in the way of my best self? Like, what's a little E entertainment every so often, especially if I don't even talk to anyone about it. It's just the self-indulgence. Or frankly, my Facebook news feed. I mean, I'm on there just passing some time, seeing what others are up to, maybe like gossiping in my own head a little bit. What is at stake here?
You're investing in the ego construct, and everybody else's egos you're just plugging right in, and you're taking that into your consciousness, and that shapes your consciousness. So the internal culture within us becomes that of egotism, self-centeredness, I, me, mine, enjoying the pain of others, living vicariously, the fantasy of, oh, if only I were enough, then it would be amazing. It's just complete unreality, and you can't undo that, unfortunately. And it's taken me many, many years to try to free myself from that, and I'm still not free. I still have all the temptations to, like, oh my God, what, Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes, they broke up so long ago. How does he feel about that? What a miserable life. It's there in the system, and the only thing that flushes it out is the connection to something beyond that, the feeling of loving connection on the platform of the real self, the soul.
Thank you for that, Hari. And Vipin, to answer or to address what you asked, people don't really need to listen to what we're saying. For anyone listening now, look at your own life. Look at the last 6 months. And what was the best time you've had in the last 6 months? What was the most meaningful time that you've had in the last 6 months? Or pick out a few times. If I was a betting man, I would bet a lot of money that it was based around some deep and meaningful connection where I'm talking about something that's really important to me, or I'm talking about something that's really important to the other person. And we're not staying at a superficial level. We're actually getting deep into why it's important and being real with one another. And we're talking about something that might not feel positive, but it's where I'm coming from is to create some sort of positive energy coming out of the conversation, either to process something that's been painful, or I'm actually appreciating what somebody else did well. There's a common self-help phrase, what you appreciate appreciates. So what are we appreciating? What do we want to appreciate even more? And that's where we should be focusing our attention.
Thank you both. So, Hari, what I was taking away from what you shared was on a scale where on one end we can be identifying with our egos and on the other we can be identifying with the real self. By engaging in gossip, we're investing more and more in identifying with our ego instead of the self. And every investment we make on that end of the scale pulls us further and further away from the self. And so recognizing that that is the cost. The cost is, where do you end up on this spectrum? I have two last questions for you both. Michael, this one I want to ask you, because you shared this example of this chat that you're in with a group of people. And that's often the experience of people that everyone around me in a setting is gossiping. And how do I manage not to participate without conveying that I'm better than the rest or a holier than thou message? So how do you engage in an environment when that's either the norm or even in a particular circumstance, like that's the energy that's there?
It's a great question. It's not, I don't have an easy answer. The approach that I've taken in that chat is, and actually all of my chats, I made a pact with myself a few months ago to not engage in that gossipy behavior myself. So I'm not withdrawing from the chat. These are still some of my closest friends in the world, and I have no intention of withdrawing from these relationships. I love these guys. But I mean, I laugh at some of the things that are said, and I'm still like,
you're still consuming it.
I'm still consuming it. Yeah. And I'm not taking the bold step of trying to correct it in any sort of way. But my intermediate stage, at least for now, is to not engage with it myself and not promote it. And then when I feel like the conversation is more uplifting, or I want to share something that I feel like is meaningful, then to just share it and to be a part of the conversation in that way. It doesn't feel like my place or that it's the right opportunity at this moment in time to be able to correct the culture that's in there. And I'm also aware that I'm still a part of that in some ways, and I helped to create it. So there's a lot of reasons why it doesn't feel like I can do that at this moment in time. And I think the next step would be to just start living that myself, that what you appreciate appreciates, and bringing more positivity, more appreciation, more genuine connection to that group and however I can. And it can start small and build from there.
I'm just imagining you responding in the chat, really appreciating this friend who has had such success and everything that's been achieved. And then the group say, Michael, why do you have to rain on our parade? We're having a lot of fun here. But I really appreciate what you're saying and how you're working on it. And it's sort of a work in progress. Hari Prasad, what would you add here?
I would just say, beware that usually we're seeing opposite sides of the ego. Like there's sort of a duality where on the one side, we would want to appreciate the person for the ego accomplishments. And on the other side, we want to knock the person for the ego accomplishments. Both are playing into the same kind of thing. And the appreciation of the person is not so much the issue of gossip, but it's still plugged into the same system. And so beware of that duality and think, what is the person really about? What is the core of the person? Have I ever seen any qualities that come from the core of the person. And then try to set an example. Really just try to set an example. As Michael, you were sharing, not engaging and coming from a different place. And you'd be surprised how much that example can affect others, especially over time. And if it doesn't, because people are locked into their ego worlds, don't be surprised by that either. But at least you can rest easy. You can go to sleep with a clean, clear conscience. I've done everything that I could. And where you can disengage from these systems, oh my God, what a relief, what a benefit. And where you can't, it demands tolerance and a kind of ability to, I would say, be yogic. When I say yogic, I mean somebody who can really fix their minds in a very powerful, determined way that transcends the circumstances. So don't be locked into that system. If you have to be a part of it, fix your mind in a different way.
Thank you. The last thing I was going to ask in closing was, especially, it's true that you can listen and feel like, well, maybe this is too high-minded for me. Like maybe what we're talking about is meant for a slim few and not for myself. I wanted to ask, what is one step that you would encourage people to take towards a higher consciousness as it relates to gossip?
I would offer one simple question. Whenever you get the impulse to share something with somebody, especially if there's some sense that it might be some gossip, ask yourself the question, why am I telling the person this? What do I want from this interaction? And you might have to ask yourself that question a couple of times to really get at the real answer. But I think a lot will become clear if we're sincere and introspective when we ask ourselves that question.
I love that. I mean, that's not, it relates well beyond gossip. Also, it's just what you're describing is living an intentional life, being very intentional with my words and my actions. And so if I'm about to share anything and I'm able to create the space to be able to ask myself, why am I sharing this? What's in it for me? What's in it for the other person? That's helpful. And in the context of gossip, that's even kind of potentially more relevant because you'll be able to see some of those, going back to the earlier conversation around what's the insecurity that may be the underlying motivation for me to be engaging in this way.
Yes, especially if the sentence begins with, oh my God, did you hear? Then that's a good clue.
Hari Prasada.
Yeah, thank you. This is much more accessible than we think. We regularly have the experience at our workshops and classes. People walk in and they feel an intentional culture that was co-created here with a purpose to invest in the self and not the ego. And when people feel that, there may be some residue, of course, from the ego, it's not that the ego magically disappears, but people seem to get a sense for how to engage in a healthy way. It's like intuitive because we're not our egos. And when people have that experience, it's so uplifting. It's so powerful. It can be very emotional even. And it's so different. And that can happen to somebody. It happens all the time to somebody who's fresh off the street, somebody who's never done this kind of work before, because it's inherent, because the self is real. And we know what it's like. As soon as we engage that and we get closer to experience of it, something happens to us. So we shouldn't think this is something so distant. Yes, to live there all the time and to achieve the full self, which is much higher even than what we're talking about, that is distant. But that is a journey that we can very enthusiastically walk with the greatest gains. And it's so inspiring. And even the first steps are so powerful and so reaffirming. So we should not keep this at a distance. We should not think this doesn't apply to me and dismiss it. And we can gauge very easily, am I gossiping based on this one principle. Am I wishing ill of the person? Am I happy if they remain in their faulty or unfortunate state? Am I happy if they stay like that? Or do I wish them well? Do I hope that they learn and grow and come to a higher place? If I wish well, then I'm no longer in a gossip mode. And if I wish ill, then that confirms, yes, indeed, the ego is at play. This is gossip. So just really gauge in every interaction. And the last image I would want to give is my guru. He saw me, I was just sharing with you guys before this podcast, he saw me walking to a lecture that he was giving at this festival. And I was speaking with different spiritualists and connecting very eagerly, happily, joyfully. And he noted that. And he called out to me as he was on his way to give his presentation. And I was on my way there as well. He called out to me, Hari Prasada, the nectar bee. And I felt so encouraged and so touched by that, because there are two kinds of consciousness. The default consciousness of the ego, which is like a fly that goes to stool. It goes to dirty things that bring us down. It goes to the misfortune and the faults all the time. And there's so much gravitational pull. So do we want to be like the fly, or do we want to be like the nectar bee, the honey bee, that goes for the ambrosial flowers, that goes for the sweetness of connection with oneself and with other real selves? And I always think, I want to be the nectar bee. I want to be like that. I see all these fly tendencies in me. Let them wait. The ego doesn't need immediate attention. In fact, if I just keep it out of this, it dies down and the nectar consumes me. That is so much more wonderful. And I never feel like, oh, I missed out on the stool.
Thank you for that metaphor of the honeybee versus the fly. And thank you both for such a deep conversation on this topic that I had not expected. I don't know why we always go deep, and I really appreciate. I'm walking away with a very strong intention to be as aware, as vigilant as possible around my own tendencies, my own nature for gossip. And I promise myself and you both to keep working on my own consciousness in this regard. So thank you. Thank you so much for inspiring me today.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm so inspired by you guys.
Thank you guys for this conversation.
Thank you for listening to Upbuilding the Self. Upbuild is a leadership development company that offers workshops, coaching, and other services to help you on the path towards being your best self, free from the shackles of the ego. To learn more about our work, visit our website, upbuild.com, and sign up for our newsletter to gain access to podcasts, reflections, and upcoming events. If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes to leave us a review so that others can find and benefit from the podcast. We look forward to being with you again next time.